Let me tell you exactly what I came home to after 14 days in Portugal. My wife Maya and I had flown back into the regional airport on a Tuesday morning, bags heavy with olive oil, ceramic tiles we'd wrapped in hotel towels, and the particular exhaustion that comes from the best 2 weeks of your life. We pulled into Creekwood Estates at approximately 11:47 a.m. I know the time because my dash cam timestamps every frame. I know the time because, as an infrastructure systems engineer with 22 years of building things that absolutely cannot fail, I document everything. It is not a quirk, it is a discipline. And on that Tuesday morning in late October, that discipline would become the single most important habit of my adult life. The wall was 8 feet tall, poured concrete, and it sat 14 inches inside my eastern property line. Not on the easement, not on the shared boundary strip, on my land. On the 3-foot buffer I had personally surveyed, staked with orange flags, and documented with a licensed surveyor's report 6 weeks before I had even signed a mortgage. Maya saw it first. She said very quietly, "Marcus, what is that?" I put the car in park. I got out. I walked the full length of it, 42 feet of freshly cured concrete block, still showing the ghost lines of the form panels, a thin white mineral efflorescence already creeping up from the base. I crouched down and pressed 2 fingers against the footer. Cold, dense, professionally poured. This had not been done last night. This had been done in stages, probably over several days, while we were in Lisbon watching the sun set over the Tagus River. I took out my phone and I called the survey firm. I called my attorney. I called my neighbor Tom, who I had met once before the wedding, in that order. Then I went inside, brewed coffee, and waited. She arrived at 2:15 p.m. I will describe Sandra Hofstede to you, because the description matters. She was approximately 61 years old, with the bearing of someone who had been the most important person in every room she had ever entered, and the quiet horror of someone who was slowly discovering that this was not universally recognized as fact. She drove a white SUV. She wore a lanyard with her HOA president badge on it like it was a federal marshal's credential. She walked across my gravel driveway with the absolute confidence of a woman who had never once been told the word no, and believed fully that this streak would continue indefinitely. I opened the door before she knocked. "Mr. Calloway," she said, smiling the way people smile when they are not actually smiling. "Sandra Hofstede, Creekwood Estates HOA, welcome home." I wanted to personally introduce myself and go over a few community standards items with you. She held up a clipboard, a thick one. "Ms. Hofstede," I said, "before we begin, I'm going to need you to step back off my porch and stand on the driveway. This conversation will happen at the property threshold, not inside." The smile flickered. She stepped back. "That wall," I said, nodding toward the eastern property line. "Explain it." She explained it the way bureaucrats always explain things they have already decided you should be grateful for. Safety, drainage concerns, a long-standing community infrastructure need. Section 9.7 of the Master Declaration, an emergency easement provision. She said all of these words in a warm, reasonable tone while her eyes watched me with the precision of a woman taking inventory. "It is on my land," I said. "The boundary interpretation under section. It is on my land," I said again. "I have a survey, dated, licensed, and filed with the county recorder's office." "Do you have a survey?" She did not answer that question. Instead, she pivoted. She needed, she said, a master key to the property. Standard protocol. Section 4.2 Safety Access Provisions. All Creekwood residents were required to submit a physical key and an access code for emergency inspection purposes. She tapped the clipboard. She had the form right here. I looked at her for a long moment. The gravel between us was absolutely still. A crow called from somewhere in the oak stand behind my fence line. "No," I said just that, one word. Flat and final as a poured footer. Sandra Hofstede tilted her head with the slow, terrible patience of someone who has destroyed people before and enjoyed it. Mr. Calloway, she said softly, Creekwood has mechanisms for residents who choose not to cooperate with community standards. I'd hate for your first weeks here to be complicated. I'm sure you would, I said. Then I closed the door. The first fine hit the portal at 6:04 a.m. the following morning. I know because I had set an alert. $250. Violation code V114. Unauthorized modification of community infrastructure. I read it twice, made a note in my incident log, and poured a second cup of coffee. By noon there were 3 more, $500 each. V201. Failure to submit emergency access credentials. V309. Noncompliance with perimeter maintenance standards. V441. Obstruction of community sight lines. That last one was particularly creative given that the only thing obstructing anyone's sight line was the wall Sandra had built on my property while I was eating pastéis de nata in Belém. By the end of the first week, the automated HOA portal had generated $4,750 in fines. There were also 2 formal notices suggesting that a previously undiscovered water line ran beneath my western lawn, and that my failure to grant inspection access constituted a public health risk. There was a letter on official Creekwood stationery describing, in clinical language, what would happen to my credit rating and property title if these violations were not resolved. The letters were unsigned except for a printed name, Sandra M. Hofstede, board president. I printed every single one, time-stamped them, scanned them, uploaded them to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers, and a physical hard drive that I kept in a fireproof safe bolted to the concrete subfloor of my basement utility room. On day 9, a sheriff's deputy named Walters came to the door. He was about 50, heavyset in the way of a man who had been genuinely strong 20 years ago and had not entirely lost the habit of it. He held his hat in one hand and looked mildly uncomfortable. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "got a complaint filed. HOA claiming you've got some kind of barricade situation. Non-compliance with an emergency abatement request." I invited him in. I showed him the survey. I showed him the fines. I showed him photographs of the wall taken the morning I returned, time-stamped, geolocated, cross-referenced with the county parcel map I had pulled from the recorder's website. Deputy Walters looked at the wall photograph for a long time. "That's on your land," he said. It wasn't a question. 14 inches inside my eastern boundary, I said. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "Look," he said, in the careful tone of a man who had to keep working in this county, "I can't tell you what to do or not do. But Sandra Hofstede has been the HOA president out here for 11 years and she has, he stopped. "She plays the long game is all. She's had people tied up in county process disputes for years. Just document everything." He paused at the door. "I mean everything." "Already am," I said. After he left, I spent the weekend installing the system. It wasn't dramatic, it was precise. A 4-camera exterior surveillance array with night vision and license plate recognition, connected to a local NAS drive with 30-day rolling storage. A commercial-grade biometric entry panel on the front door, fingerprint and retinal, with a physical keypad backup. Survey boundary markers in 5/8-inch rebar, driven 18 inches deep, with orange witness stakes every 6 feet along every property line. Each one flagged with surveyor's ribbon, and a weatherproof placard stating the parcel number and survey date. I ran a buried conduit along the eastern line and mounted a continuous loop, recording cameras specifically aimed at the wall. On day 12, Sandra arrived with a locksmith. A young guy, maybe 25, with a bag of tools and the look of someone who had been told this was a routine service call and was now beginning to doubt it. He looked at the biometric panel. He looked at me, he looked at his bag of tools. "Sir," he said, I'm not equipped for this. And I'm pretty sure I can't legally." "You're welcome to enter the property," I said pleasantly, "as soon as you submit a biometric scan for the access log. It's a simple process. Should take about 4 minutes." Sandra's voice came from the driveway. "Just override the panel, Derek." Derek looked at the panel, he looked at me, he picked up his bag. "Ms. Hofstede," he said, walking back down the steps, "I'm not losing my license over this." She stood there on my gravel driveway, the lanyard swaying slightly in the November wind, and looked at me with something that had finally moved past annoyance into a different register entirely. Colder, more architectural. I smiled pleasantly and closed the door. The HOA's financials were public record. Most people don't know that, or if they know it, they don't think it means anything. It means everything. I started pulling documents at 9 p.m. on a Thursday, and I did not stop until 2:30 a.m. Archived budget reports for the prior 6 years, vendor contracts, meeting minutes, or what passed for them, thin, selectively worded summaries that left enormous gaps where decisions must have been made, assessment histories, capital improvement fund ledgers. I spread them across my dining room table in chronological order. I made a pot of coffee. I put on reading glasses, and I began to find the things that had been hidden inside plain sight. The concrete barrier poured on my property had been line-itemed in the current fiscal year's capital improvement budget as Eastern Perimeter Drainage Infrastructure Enhancement. Budgeted cost $28,400. That number sat in the column with a check beside it, marked complete. The vendor listed was Hofstede Keller Construction, LLC. I sat with that for a moment. Then I typed the name into the state business registry. Hofstede Keller Construction, LLC was registered in this state 18 months prior. Listed officers: Gerald P. Keller, managing member; Angela R. Hofstede Keller, registered agent. Angela Hofstede Keller was Sandra's daughter. I found the filing in under 4 minutes. I went back into the budget archives. Hofstede Keller had received 3 prior contracts from Creekwood HOA. A parking lot resurfacing project, $44,000. A community entrance landscaping renovation, $31,500. An emergency storm drain repair, $17,200. Total, $121,100 in HOA assessment dollars flowing to a company directly controlled by the board president's immediate family. No competitive bidding records in any of the meeting minutes. No conflict of interest disclosures. Nothing. I photographed every page. I exported every digital document. I organized it into a folder structure with dates, amounts, and cross-references. At some point around midnight, there was a soft knock at my front door. I checked the camera feed. It was my neighbor Tom Ray's late 60s. A retired high school history teacher who lived 3 houses down and had exactly the posture of a man who had been afraid of something for a long time. He was carrying a manila envelope. I let him in. He sat down at my kitchen table and folded his hands. "My wife told me not to come," he said. "She's probably right." "I'm glad you did," I said. He opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies, slightly blurred, clearly scanned from originals on a home machine, of internal board correspondence. Emails printed and distributed at closed sessions. A memorandum from Sandra to the full board discussing the Callaway parcel acquisition opportunity, 3 months before I had even closed on my property. A reference to the Eastern Wall project as necessary to establish infrastructure justification for easement expansion. A line in Sandra's handwriting in the margin of 1 page. If we control the eastern buffer, the county variance application goes through. Gerald gets the contract. We're done. I read it twice. Tom, I said carefully, how did you get these? He looked at his hands. She had me on the architectural review subcommittee for 2 years. I resigned last spring when I cleaned out my files. He shrugged. I kept copies of things. I wasn't sure why at the time. Have you shown these to anyone? No, he looked up. Marcus, she's been doing this for a long time. She got the Parkers to sell. She got the Woos to just leave. She files complaints. She drains people with process. She makes them miserable until they give up. I watched her do it. She picked the wrong person this time, I said. I called my attorney the next morning. Alina Marsh was 44, Stanford Law, and had spent 8 years doing real estate litigation before pivoting to property rights cases. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "Send me everything. Tonight." I did. And then I uploaded a second copy to a remote server in a different state, mirrored it to a third, and sent encrypted links to 2 people I trusted absolutely. My brother in Denver and Maya's cousin, who worked in IT security in Atlanta. Sandra could move against my property. She could not move against all of that. On November 19th, my access to the HOA online resident portal was revoked. The notification email, which they did send, to their credit, cited account review pending compliance assessment. It meant I could no longer see new violation notices, could not respond to them through the official channel, and could not access the meeting schedule or minutes. They had, in effect, locked me out of the system they were simultaneously using to find me. I documented the lockout. Alina Marsh sent a formal letter to the board demanding restoration of access within 72 hours under state homeowner association disclosure laws. She cited 3 specific statutes. She received no response. On November 23rd, the county building department received a complaint about my property, alleged structural hazard. Failing foundation, unvented crawl space, possible sinkhole risk. An inspector came. He spent 11 minutes looking at the property and told me, with the weary professionalism of a man who had been sent on many pointless calls, that my foundation was fine. My crawl space was code compliant, and he was required to note in his report that the complaint had been filed anonymously through a third-party reporting portal. On November 27th, 2 separate welfare checks were conducted by county deputies after anonymous calls reported that a resident appeared to be in psychological distress and had sealed himself inside his home. Both deputies, different ones each time, stood at my door, looking the particular shade of embarrassed that professionals reserve for moments when they know they are being used. I was calm, articulate, and fine. I showed them my kitchen, my wife waving from the living room, the casserole on the stove. I documented both visits. Body cam requests were filed. The vehicle started on November 29th. A gray sedan, no markings, partial plate I captured on the dash cam, sat on the public road shoulder with a sightline directly to my driveway. It was there for 3 days, rotating positions slightly each afternoon. One morning I walked out with a coffee thermos, stood at my property line, and looked directly at it for 2 full minutes. It left within the hour. 2 nights later, motion alerts from my perimeter cameras flagged 2 individuals moving through the oak stand along my rear property line. They moved slowly, paused, moved again. I watched them on my phone screen from my bed, Maya asleep beside me. They never crossed the boundary markers. They were gone within 40 minutes. I exported the footage, noted the timestamp, and went back to sleep. Alina called me the morning of December 3rd. "They're calling an emergency board session," she said. "Closed session." "I've already got word from Tom Ray's. Sandra is moving to authorize an emergency abatement action under the community's architectural control provisions." She's claiming the boundary markers you installed are community hazard items and that the biometric entry system violates emergency access covenants. She's going to vote herself the authority to have them removed. Can she do that legally? In a closed session with no notice to the affected homeowner, Alina let the silence answer the question. She's not trying to do it legally. She's trying to do it fast before we can file for an injunction. When is the session? She hasn't noticed it publicly. Tom found a draft agenda on a shared drive. He thinks it's this week. I looked out my kitchen window at the eastern wall, the one Sandra had built on my property. I looked at the rebar stakes with their orange flags snapping in the December wind. Alina, I said, let her vote. Let her move every piece she's going to move. I want it all on the record. Marcus, I've got cameras on every corner. I've got motion sensors on every stake. I've got the footage already backed up in 3 states. Let her come. There was a pause. Okay, Alina said quietly. Then let's make sure we're ready. I spent the next 2 days doing exactly that. Camera angles confirmed, storage verified, alert threshold set. I tested the floodlight triggers 6 times. I contacted Deputy Walters and gave him a professional, unemotional briefing on the situation, the evidence, and the pattern of escalation. I asked him, not demanded, asked to be available this week. He said, I'll have my radio on. They came at 9:00 p.m. on a Thursday. I heard them before I saw them. The low diesel grumble of a truck with a heavy trailer. The metallic percussion of equipment clanking against steel side rails. The crunch of aggregate under commercial-grade tires. My perimeter camera showed a convoy, 2 pickup trucks, a flatbed with a compact excavator strapped down with load binders, and a generator trailer with a yellow housing that said Atlas Power on the side. 6 people, maybe 7. They stopped at the edge of my driveway, just beyond the property line, and for about 90 seconds nothing happened. Then doors opened and boots hit the gravel. My phone was already in my hand. I sent 3 simultaneous messages, one to Alina, one to Deputy Walters, one to Tom Reyes. Each one said the same 4 words, they're here. Start now. Then I walked to my front door intercom panel and switched on the exterior speaker array. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I spoke in the same tone I use when I'm walking a client through a systems integration test. This property is under active video surveillance. All audio and video is being recorded and transmitted to remote servers. You are standing on a privately owned parcel. Please identify yourselves and your authority before proceeding. A voice, male, rough. Someone who had been hired for a job and was already not entirely comfortable with it, said something I couldn't make out. There was movement. Lights bobbed. The generator started with a mechanical bark that settled into a sustained roar. Sandra stepped into the frame of my camera's east lens at 9:07 p.m. She was wearing a down coat and holding the clipboard. In December, at night, she still had the lanyard on. She walked to the flatbed and spoke to the operator of the excavator, a man in a yellow hard hat who was in the process of releasing the tie-down straps. She pointed at my boundary markers. She pointed at my front entry. She made the decisive gesture of someone who had voted herself a mandate and intended to use it. The contractor with the hard hat climbed up to the excavator cab. The machine's hydraulics hissed as it powered up. I pressed the intercom. The rebar markers you are approaching delineate a licensed survey boundary filed with the county recorder's office. Disturbing them constitutes criminal trespass and destruction of property. This is your final notice. From somewhere in the darkness, Sandra's voice, proceed with abatement. We have board authorization. The excavator bucket dropped toward the first marker stake. The floodlights hit. 4 2,000 lumen commercial floods, triggered by the motion threshold I had set, activated simultaneously, and turned my entire property into a white noon. The excavator operator flinched so hard the machine bucked. Two of the workers dropped what they were holding. Sandra threw a hand up in front of her face. And then the sirens. Deputy Walters arrived first, his cruiser plus a second unit, light bars strobing red and blue in the oak canopy. Behind them, Tom Ray's ancient Subaru. And behind Tom, 4 more vehicles that I recognized as belonging to other Creekwood homeowners Tom had quietly called. People were out of cars with phones, screens glowing, filming. Someone had a ring light. It was December and nearly 9:30 at night, and my driveway looked like a film set. Walters stepped out with his hand up, professional, deliberate. Everybody stop what they're doing, right now. The excavator engine cut. Silence fell over the oak stand like something physical. I walked out my front door and down the steps. I had my survey documents in a folder. I had my phone running a live stream that was already going to a platform Eleanor's paralegal monitored. I walked to where Walters stood and handed him the folder. "Deputy Walters," I said, "I have the license survey, the county parcel map, the chain of title, and approximately 9 hours of surveillance footage showing preparation and approach. I also have evidence that the board vote authorizing this action was taken in a closed session with no proper homeowner notice." Walters looked at the documents. He looked at Sandra. Sandra's attorney, a narrow man in his 50s who had arrived in one of the pickup trucks and had the look of someone accustomed to making problems disappear in conference rooms, stepped forward. "This is a lawful community abatement action under the associations. This parcel," Walters said, cutting him off cleanly, "has been confirmed by county records as private property with no recorded easement authorizing tonight's activities." He had done his homework. He had spent time with those county records I suspected he'd requested after our conversation. "Ms. Hofstede, the excavator needs to go back on the trailer right now. We have a board resolution, ma'am." His voice had the texture of finished concrete. "Step over here." I watched Sandra Hofstede walk to the shoulder of my driveway with a sheriff's deputy, her clipboard pressed to her chest, her lanyard swinging. I watched the excavator operator begin reattaching his tie-down straps. I watched the attorney make 3 phone calls in rapid succession, moving farther and farther from the lights each time. At 9:52 p.m., Sandra Hofstede was detained for questioning regarding criminal trespass, coordination of property damage, and what Walters, with careful legal precision, described as conducting a non-consented forced access attempt on private property. She was not handcuffed on the driveway. She was not screaming. She was quiet in the way that people become quiet when the architecture of their certainty collapses all at once. I stood at my property line and watched her get into the back of the cruiser. The orange flags on my rebar stakes moved softly in the December air. Every camera kept recording. The emergency county hearing was scheduled for December 11th, 8 days after the night on the driveway. Sandra's attorney, his name was Forsyth, and he wore the kind of suits that are meant to communicate that the bill will be large, filed 2 pre-hearing motions. The first sought to suppress the surveillance footage on the grounds that recording equipment placed in proximity to common property lines violated state privacy statute 1842. The second sought to characterize the December 3rd board resolution as a valid emergency health and safety action, exempt from standard homeowner notification requirements. Alina read both motions at her office and texted me 2 words: "They're scared." We arrived at the county courthouse at 8:45 a.m. Tom Ray's was there. 3 other Creekwood homeowners, families who had been fined, pressured, and in 2 cases had made decisions about selling their homes specifically because of Sandra's board, were seated in the gallery. One of them, a woman named Patricia Osai, had driven 4 hours from the state where she had relocated. She had brought a folder of her own. The judge was the Honorable Claire Danthorpe, and she had the particular judicial energy of someone who had heard every variety of nonsense and had developed a sophisticated intolerance for wasting her time. Forsyth opened by characterizing the December 3rd action as a lawful safety response to documented structural concerns on my property. He cited the county building complaint, the same one that had generated the 11-minute inspector visit, as evidence of a legitimate community safety interest. He spoke with practiced confidence. He called the surveillance footage an overreach of residential monitoring standards. Judge Danthorpe looked at him over her reading glasses. Counsel, before we proceed, is the plaintiff's property located within the recorded HOA boundary? Forsyth paused. Eleanor was already on her feet. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A, the licensed survey of the Callaway parcel, with county recorders filing number 2023 PR 44178, and Exhibit B, the county parcel map with the HOA boundary overlay, showing clearly that Mr. Callaway's eastern property line places him outside the HOA's recorded jurisdiction by 14 inches at its closest point. She let that sit for a moment. The wall that initiated this dispute was built on land the HOA does not own, does not have easement rights to, and has never had any recorded interest in. Danthorpe looked at the parcel overlay. She looked at Forsyth. Is this survey contested? Your Honor, the HOA's position is that the boundary interpretation. Is the survey contested? She repeated, slower. Forsyth adjusted his tie. We would request time to commission an independent. Motion to suppress the surveillance footage is denied, Danthorpe said. Continue. Eleanor presented the footage in 3 segments. The first was the approach, the vehicles, the equipment, the recorded timestamps, the generator trailer with its identifiable Atlas Power branding. The second was the confrontation itself. Sandra's voice giving the authorization order, the excavator powering up, the bucket descending toward the survey stake. The third was the key piece. Eleanor had obtained, through the contractor's attorney after his client had retained separate counsel from the HOA, a signed written statement from the excavator operator, confirming that he had been told by Sandra Hofstede that the board had full legal authority to remove the markers, that the property was an HOA common area, and that the owner wouldn't be a problem. The operator had since discovered that none of these things were true and had cooperated completely. Forsyth objected to the statement's admissibility. He was overruled. Then Eleanor submitted what she referred to, without drama, as Exhibit G. Exhibit G was a 47-page financial analysis covering 6 years of HOA budget records, cross-referenced with state business registry filings, contractor payment records, and bank transaction summaries obtained through discovery. It showed, in the clean, irrefutable language of forensic accounting, $121,100 in HOA assessment payments made to Hofstede Keller Construction LLC, a company owned by Sandra's daughter, with no competitive bidding, no conflict of interest disclosures, no board vote by any members other than Sandra herself, and 2 board members who, the exhibit noted, had received direct personal payments from Hofstede Keller, totaling $14,400 over the same period. It also showed the wall, my wall, the Eastern Perimeter Drainage Infrastructure Enhancement, $28,400, paid to Hofstede Keller within the same fiscal cycle, for a concrete structure built on property the HOA did not own, tied to a county variance application that, if approved, would have transferred a portion of my parcel's assessed value to adjacent common area, increasing the overall HOA development footprint and the associated contract value for future infrastructure projects by an estimated $340,000. Sandra had not been trying to harass me. She had been trying to steal from me. Systematically, procedurally, bureaucratically, buried in the language of safety provisions and community standards. She had been running a real estate acquisition scheme funded by the people who trusted her to manage their shared home. Forsyth made no further objections during the presentation. He was very still. Judge Danthorpe removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. The courtroom was quiet enough that I could hear the climate system running in the ceiling. I'm ordering an immediate forensic audit of the Creekwood Estates HOA financial accounts going back 7 years, she said. All HOA operating and reserve accounts are frozen pending that audit. I'm issuing a cease and desist on all HOA enforcement actions against the Callaway property, effective immediately. And I'm making a criminal referral to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and racketeering under state statute. She looked at Sandra Hofstede, who was seated beside Forsyth in the kind of stillness that comes just after something irreversible. Ms. Hofstede, the judge said, I would strongly recommend that you consult with a criminal defense attorney before you leave this building today. The gavel came down at 2:17 p.m. I sat in the gallery for about 30 seconds after, looking at nothing in particular. Then I closed my folder, stood up, and walked out into a December afternoon that was cold and clean and entirely free of obstruction. The indictments came in February. Sandra Hofstede, racketeering, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, criminal trespass. 2 board members, conspiracy, misappropriation of community funds. Gerald Keller, the managing member of Hofstede Keller Construction, fraudulent contracting, receipt of unlawful consideration. The district attorney's office, once they had the forensic audit results, found that the total figure was not $121,100. It was, across all obfuscated vendor structures and reimbursement channels, closer to $390,000. The Creekwood HOA board was dissolved by court order in March. A court-appointed administrator took over the essential functions, maintaining shared infrastructure, collecting minimal assessments, while the community organized a vote to establish a new resident-controlled board with mandatory conflict of interest disclosures and open competitive bidding requirements for every contract above $5,000. On the first Saturday in April, about 30 people gathered at the Creekwood Estates entrance on a morning that smelled like cut grass and new warmth. Someone had brought bolt cutters. Someone else had brought a flatbed dolly. Tom Reyes was there with his wife, who was crying a little and looked like she hadn't expected to be. Patricia Ose had driven back from 2 states away. The gilded HOA entrance sign, CREKWOOD Estates, a premier community, had been there for 11 years. It came down in about 4 minutes. There was applause, and then laughter at the applause, the particular sheepish laughter of people who have been tense for a very long time and are only now remembering what it feels like to let it go. The concrete wall on my eastern property line came down on a Tuesday in April, removed by a licensed contractor, the footage documented, the invoice filed. The foundation was clean. The soil was undisturbed below 6 inches. I had the surveyor come back out and reconfirm the boundary, redrive the rebar stakes, reflag the witness marks. That evening I installed a new deadbolt on my front door, a good one, a simple one, chrome finish, single cylinder, grade 1 commercial rating. I set the key in the lock, turned it once, heard the bolt seat clean and sure into the strike plate. Then I burned the property stake that Sandra's contractor had driven into my ground. The orange plastic burned first, then the wooden shaft, then the paper tag with the HOA's parcel notation. It took maybe 2 minutes. Maya stood beside me with her coffee and we watched it go. "You good?" she asked. Yeah, I said, I'm good. I did not celebrate loudly. I did not post a gloating message on the neighborhood app. I replaced the flag on my eastern boundary with a clean new one and went inside and made dinner. Some fights are not won by being louder than the other person. They are won by being more careful, more patient, more disciplined, and more willing to let the truth do the work when you've built the conditions for it to function. Sandra Hofstede thought she was dealing with someone who would be worn down by process, buried in fines, psychologically pressured into compliance or flight. She had done it to others. She understood people who got angry or scared or exhausted. She did not understand someone who simply kept building. So I kept building. If someone in power has ever tried to use process, bureaucracy, or outright intimidation to take something from you, and you stood your ground, drop a yes in the comments right now. I want to hear from everyone who knows exactly what this feels like. And if you want to see what happens when HOA boards mess with the wrong people, hit subscribe. Because this community, we document everything.